In part one, we just covered the foundations of setting up a sales function for a high volume multi-market setup. And we covered a couple of things in the early stages like onboarding, codifying what works, what doesn't work, expanding into the first markets, into different markets than your home market, looking into quality assurance, team leader enablement, and onboarding particularly. Like, how do you set the tone? And once people come into your company, how do you keep them on board with the direction of the company? And before all of this, how do you even hire the right people to be a part of the company anyway? And we discussed and explored the differences between hiring people, especially salespeople, based on an interview or on actual case studies and role plays in which you really stress test the candidate and avoid costly and expensive mishires. We ended the last part with the multi-market setups, because now you move into an area where you need to hire leaders for different markets. As you start opening new locations, new offices, it takes a certain type of personality who wants to do this, who might leave a corporate job to go on this risk. It is a career risk to go into an early stage company that's just opening in a new country, and you might be the only leader there. You might be even incorporated with your own name in the registry, and so you need to figure things out. And it takes a certain personality for this, and this is a type of personality that might not be always compatible with what an HQ or what a centralized organization would want to see, because centralized organization always would like to see people a bit more on the side of compliance and obedience. And of course, those things don't go together. Like, you're either in an exploratory stage and you hire pioneers, you hire trailblazers, you hire people who can move the needle, who also sometimes break rules just to push things forward, or you hire people who are compliant, who play by the rules, who are just keeping it low. And but those will not be the people who will build your market. Those are not the people who will build things from scratch, who take risks, who figure things out, who think on their feet. And now this creates a challenge for a multi-market company, because you will be caught between centralization and decentralization. And for a long time, you will probably not be able to figure that tension out. You will live with that tension for a while. And every time implement something on the HQ level or on the global level, it will be exponentially harder to standardize that, or to bring all markets at least to a certain baseline level in terms of performance, processes, and so forth. Now you might think, who needs that anyway? I'm just figuring things out and we can fix that later. Well, I think everybody who has worked extensively with organization understands it's always easier to build things right from the beginning than trying to fix broken structures afterwards retroactively. And you can do yourself a favor by at least paying attention to these dynamics. Multi-market setups are specifically challenging because you will not always have visibility in what happens in those markets. There could be regulatory risks, there could be market risks, incompetitive risks that you might not be aware of, and your local leader might also not be aware of, because they're just busy building something from scratch. Sometimes there's no real data connectivity. Sometimes that's due to being early stage. There's just not the data infrastructure available at all. Sometimes it's also because data can be political. Like, in certain aspects, I might not want to show my costs or my abysmal conversion rates. So I start using calculation logics that I think, or I assume, are all right, as long as nobody challenges me on those. I'm fine. I can always say, like, I didn't know better. And so you will end up with a patchwork data framework where often different markets calculate certain metrics differently, especially if they're self-reported. And this leads to a situation where in the HQ, you start losing touch with reality. You think that a certain market is successful when in fact they might not be. You might celebrate the revenue results in one market by being completely ignorant and oblivious of their costs and of their margins. And you might just make assumptions about those and just fingers crossed hope that everything is going fine. You can always bridge this for a certain amount of time, especially if you're venture capital backed, and sometimes that's even part of the game. That's a tactic. You say, grow fast, break things, figure it out afterwards, and that can be tactically a good move. because you don't build a market by through strategy decks. You build a market by figuring it out, by going in, by putting money into your marketing, into your positioning, into your branding. You build a presence. You have a strong sales team that converts this interest into revenue, and a customer success function that expands on that revenue. Your product needs to, of course, keep up with the pace, and also localize, or become customized for this market and for the preferences in those markets. So this needs money, this needs budgets, this needs speed, and it doesn't really need much discussions and consensus and committees. That's absolutely understandable. But there's always a point to be made about at least implement dashboards, guardrails, and incentives. Dashboards, guardrails, and incentives. Dashboards allow you visibility centrally, and that means that you can make strategic decisions when something goes off that sometimes the local market is not even aware of. It means also you have unified reporting standards. Same tools are being used for reporting. Guardrails means there are certain constraints legally, ethically, operationally, within which you need to operate. And it can also be in marketing and branding. You don't want a completely wildly disconnected local brand. There are certain guidelines that need to be in place, but of course there's also a lot of autonomy on the tactical level. And ultimately, you look at the incentive structures, which is what are you actually paying bonuses on? Do you pay those local markets based on only their sales, only their revenue? Are the local leaders incentivized? Do they get their bonus for this? Or do you actually give them bonuses for, let's call it, more long-term value creation, like their margins, like their LTV CAC ratio, their LTV in general, right? Like keeping costs down while bringing revenue up. And if you incentivize differently, you will also see that behavior adjusts to those incentives. And you will have multiple markets that then work towards the enterprise value of the global company, instead of having multiple markets each serving themselves, fighting for their own success and getting their sales bonus by just over-investing, over-focusing on the revenue part with zero regards for costs or margins, which again can sometimes be tactically intentional, and it can be a good tactic for the short term, but it's definitely not a long-term strategy, because at some point there is a reckoning on the balance sheet. Now, multi-market setups make everything that you do in terms of systematization that we talk about onboarding, hiring, and support, all the more difficult. Difficult doesn't mean impossible. It means you now deal with, especially when processes are not strong, you're dealing with a lot of personalities. You're dealing with a lot of relationships. You need to persuade people in order to get things done. If, of course, you don't have dashboards, guardrails, and incentives in place, even more so, you will end up where you need to negotiate almost for every single improvement. And people in different markets will always reject any improvement that comes from the HQ, because it's being perceived as an intrusion. Sometimes rightly so, if the local context is not being considered enough. But most of the time, any change is presented anyway as it's 80-20. Here's your 80% of, that's the guardrail part that needs to be implemented, and the 20% you localize. And sometimes the percentage is 60-40. It depends on which topic we're talking about. And once you have that multi-market setup and your sales organization grows further and further and further, now you need to really think about what do you actually centralize and what do you decentralize? Who makes decisions about what? And this can become quite complex. The CEO might not always have time and bandwidth for this. You really need to sit down for this, probably for a couple of days, and think through it. Like, who should be in charge of what? Which stakeholder in marketing is in charge for which functions? When you have people sitting in the HQ and you have people sitting in 15 other markets, do you start building regional hubs? Like we start building regional hubs on different continents, where you have a Latin American hub, a North American hub, European hub for sales enablement and sales operations. So those hubs would have a business intelligence analyst. They would have a head of sales enablement who be supporting the training efforts, the coaching efforts, the team leader enablement. And often in those early stages, it goes even beyond the sales. It often so there's a lot to do with emotional support. Like, people join this new company that comes from another country, and they're just trying to figure it out. Like, especially if a lot of people are being hired, their structures are not in place. It's maybe a local full-time leader hasn't been hired yet. like you also need to hold that together. Like you need to hold people together, and especially in any early stage venture, there's friction points. There are things that don't go the way they go, and it goes a bit back to the way they should go. And this goes a bit back to onboarding. Do people like how do you set the expectation? I always like to use the onboarding within to state within the first half an hour. You joined a company that is like a spaceship that's already flying in space at high speed. And yet while we're flying, we're still building the spaceship. We're still building the kitchen. We're still building the toilets. We're still building the living room. Like we are building it while we're flying. And if you give people an image, if you set expectations, it increases their acceptance for those friction points way more than then coming in, and many people do this, expecting that the company should have everything under control. Most early stage companies don't have everything under control. They're still in the process of figuring it out. And it's also important that you set the right expectations for this. It happens too often that people come into a company expecting everything being settled because you have a certain expectation of what a company is. And then the system's just breaking down, things not ready, management is confused about who's in charge of what. This is all early stage fractions. It's totally natural. Some of the most successful companies in the world right now have started like this. But again, you need to set the expectations for this. And then sometimes you also need local, strong stakeholders who will hold everything together until you can create the processes, until the processes catch up, until the systems catch up on the local market level. Once the market's consolidated a bit, a next big piece was the commission model. And actually it was an ongoing discussion. Do you incentivize the sales agents only on their personal performance? But then you risk that they cut corners. You risk that they start stealing leads from their colleagues, because anything that incentivizes their own individual goals will incentivize them to act in a very selfish and self-centered manner. Then there was a move to, do we incentivize them only for the team target? So nobody gets a bonus unless the entire team achieves the target. While it can sound reasonable, it also demotivates those who are high performers, who work on the weekends, who push until 9, 10 p.m. at night or even longer. And now they don't get a bonus because 3 other people in the team didn't show the same devotion and passion for the company or for the sales results. Then you need to find a middle ground. Like, to which percentage do you incentivize individual performance? To which percentage do you incentivize the team performance? Do you give people a bonus or commission as a percentage of the revenue that they're making? Or is it like for every single sale? Or is it about how many customers they acquired, and then for each customer you have a fixed rate regardless of the revenue? Or do you implement monthly targets? Like, do you set the target and say you only get your bonus when you achieve 100%? But now you demotivate those who maybe have achieved 95%. So then how do you build a system where starting from 80%, you have a progressive increase towards a base bonus that you achieve at 100%. If you overachieve, you're getting more. That leads you then to questions, how do you actually create monthly sales targets anyway? Like, based on what data? How do you know in an exploratory market what a target should look like? And so sometimes you have benchmarks, sometimes you have historical information, other times you need to figure it out. And how do you do this? Which model do you use? For example, you can take the approach, you take the average order value with the conversion rate per sales agent, with the revenue per sales agent, and the lead volume. If you have those 4 metrics, if you have some reliable historical data, you can already project a bit and forecast what sales performance could look like, of course, including seasonality, if that's the case in the industry. And so commission becomes a very, very important thing because it drives the behaviors of the sales agent. Of course, unfortunately, also those incentives can be bypassed, especially if leadership itself is not fully on board with clean selling. You will, if high performers are being celebrated, even though everybody knows that they are causing massive amounts of refunds, that sets the tone, unfortunately, for a sales organization, for a sales team. And so sometimes, unfortunately, it can be bypassed, but overall, it gives you a structure that incentivizes the right level of performance. And then those gaps where you have personal failure, personal moral failure, especially on leadership level, that requires a different intervention from from the disciplinary authority in the sales organization, whether it's the VP of sales, whether that is the C-level, to basically remove those leaders who are violating also the market position ultimately of the company. And so with commission, you also have to ask yourself questions like, do we centralize commissions in the HQ and we do it for all markets, which puts it almost under control of finance, which also has to look at the budgets? Or is it being run by each market and they have their own budget for it, right? And so there are a lot of considerations that go into it. Ultimately, I found it most useful to centralize commissions, because whoever controls commission can steer behaviors. And if you see on a strategic central dashboard that markets are struggling with conversion rate or markets are struggling with order value, then you can first of all intervene by implementing trainings for them or looking at the lead flow, like whatever the issue is that is being caused there. And you can then also incentivize the right behaviors by running certain competitions for certain metrics. Like we need to see conversion rate go up, or we have a certain revenue target because we are about to have a funding round and the investors want to see certain revenue targets. Now I can centrally incentivize this because centrally I'm in charge of the commission system. I'm in charge of the incentive system. If the incentive system is decentralized and the investors want to see a certain number, good luck persuading every single market to push this particular metric. And so commission goes way further than just rewarding people. And at some point, there's even a push to actually incentivize MRR, so that you would even go further into rewarding sales agents who build relationships and also have a strong clawback system. If it turns out that a customer refunded because of mistakes by the sales agents, not because of lack of onboarding or something that happened in customer success, but the sales agent misrepresented the product and it comes out, then there will be a certain amount of commission that's being withheld the next month when they get their bonus and their commission. And once you implement something like this, you also set the tone for certain behaviors. So you really need to understand that you cannot drive behaviors in your revenue organization and also in your company only by brute force of personality or by pressuring people or by persuading people. Of course, sometimes there's a gap there, the processes aren't there, so you need to use this as an intermediary solution, persuading. But that's never a long-term solution. And go back to transferability and enterprise value, that's not transferable, leading by the force of your personality. An incentive system that is well thought through and that adapts, because the version 1 of the commission model is not the same as version 4 as version 5. The company learns more about itself. Company, as it scales, has different challenges and needs to incentivize different behaviors. An incentive system that is in place, that is transferable. Walking around and appealing to people's conscience to sell ethically is not scalable. You cannot run around the whole day. You have other responsibilities. So if you look at building a sales organization, especially multi-market, you want to think in systems and in processes and understand that behaviors are often the consequences of dashboards, incentives, and guardrails. And sometimes there's a lot of work to do to put those into place. It takes a lot of work to create unified dashboards. It takes a lot of work to ensure data integrity. You need to hire talented people to do that for you, who understand the business context as well. If they're data engineers, to know what to look for, to set rules then on the management level of how to collect that data, based on some stuff will be already collected by the CRM. Oftentimes it needs a lot of work before something can even be collected by a CRM system automatically instead of being self-reported by sales agents. So you always want to be in a position where the systems collect the data and where it's not self-reported. But you also understand if companies grow fast, there's not always time to hire a data engineer or somebody who sets up those systems. Because as long as things run, they run, and also you don't even know what to look for, and you don't have the bandwidth, you might not even think about that you need to hire somebody for it. You think that the dashboards that you have are enough. And so sometimes those critical factors get lost in translation. And you end up, as you said before, fixing a lot of stuff retroactively, trying to build a data infrastructure once markets are already pretty mature. It can, of course, be more challenging than doing it right from the get-go. In terms of guardrails, you can really take a page from the playbook of franchise companies, where which have perfected the localization versus centralization or globalization dynamic, where you have certain things in place that are non-negotiable, and people are, of course, being incentivized or penalized for those. And there's a lot of other things, a lot of other areas where they have free reign as long as they stay in certain constraints operationally with their marketing and so forth, financially, legally, ethically, and so forth. And lastly, with the incentive structures, you would always be well advised to centralize the incentive structure to make sure that you control which behaviors get rewarded and penalized, because depending on how you incentivize even your own leaders, they will have a motivation to either hide certain information or show certain information. If you incentivize them, for example, only on revenue, on sales, top line growth, they have an incentive not to be very forthcoming with their costs and margins. And not because they're bad people, it's just you didn't ask them for that. You never asked for it, so then why should I volunteer that if it doesn't look good in the first place, right? And so for incentives, incentives actually help you to then say, I want to see certain metrics from you. I want to see those metrics. You get rewarded if you show improvements in those metrics. And that now creates decentralized execution. This now creates autonomy, but you steer the direction of where this autonomy goes. You don't go in there now and micromanage them and tell them you have to do it on 1 to 3 in your market, but you set the direction. I want to see improvement in contribution margins. I want to see cost reduction by such and such percent month over month. And this is what you get your bonus for. How you do this is up to you. And a good principle to go by is always information should be central, context should be central, and execution should be decentral. And execution can only be decentralized if there is central information. Because otherwise, you cannot hold people accountable. You don't even know that they're doing what they're saying that they're doing. And every information that you have is self-reported. It could be somebody's opinion. It could be somebody's fragmented view of reality where they simply don't have the full picture. Or they don't even know that within that half an hour or 45 minutes that they have with you one-on-one meeting time each week, that this is something that they should be talking about with you, or if they're just bothering you. So context is king, and also context in any global organization and any scaled organization allows, if you give context to those who execute, allows them to make smarter decisions within guardrails and actually to act in the interest of your company instead of just acting in their own siloed interest based on the context that they have. Building a sales function is always challenging. But if there are few lessons to be learned, it is that the more systemically you go about it, the better. And that you cannot hold a sales organization together by force and by pressure and by personality alone. And you're dealing with some of the people in your organizations who are under the most pressure, under the most risk of job loss, because their performance is brutally transparent every single month. You're dealing with people who are stressed, who are anxious. Some of them don't show it. Some of them overplay it with macho cowboy attitudes. Others are a bit more forthcoming about it. It is a tough and stressful job by itself. Most of the time, you do not need to push people to perform better. Most of the time, you need to unblock what is actually standing in their way and in their way and the outcomes, the sales results. And that can also be across departments that you need to have a hard look into what your marketing is doing, what your product is doing, and also if you're even positioned in the right market. And if that's not the case, it's not your sales leaders who can make those adjustments. It is on the top management level to do so. And there is no merit in seeing the sales organization as something isolated from the rest of the entire revenue organization. The revenue organization, everything that touches your customer journey, from marketing, sales, customer success to product and other functions, it is an ecosystem. And all of those departments and what they do and what they don't do, they create ultimately the result. And the result is not just sales. The result is also your costs, and the result is your margins, your EBITDA, and your transferability. And there's just so much more that goes into building a sales function than just pushing people and hoping that if you just hire the right people, put them in place, that they will give you the results that you want to see. they also need onboarding. They need the right expectations being set on them. There needs to be institutional knowledge that's constantly being built up upon, processes and systems that run regardless of the person who's running it, visibility through dashboards, guardrails to also protect your brand, protect your market reputation, and of course the right incentives so that people do the right behaviors that lead to success, and ultimately increase the commercial value of the company and puts it in a strong position to be the market leader in whatever industry they're in.